The Confederate States of America is the most controversial political movement to have ever happened in this country. Ever. And I don't say that lightly. There have been different political groups and parties, and there have been different agitations throughout history, but it's never been so bad as to cause a civil war. A real civil war, where hundreds of thousands of Americans died. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the core elements that made up the Confederate mindset and ideology to try to understand what really was the motivation behind this strange political movement. Hello everyone, I am Erick Alden. Welcome to the channel. Part of the reason that I got interested in this topic in the first place was actually because of a podcast episode I did on the life of Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederate States of America. A link to that podcast will be in the description down below, so if you're interested, you can download that for free. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. If you really want to understand the Confederacy, the ideology, the reasons, the whole mindset behind it, how so many people in the South got behind this movement, you have to actually look at the way that the nation was founded as a whole, because our history as a country is very unique and very specific, and it drove a lot of the ideology behind the Confederacy, right? So think about it. We are a nation that is founded on revolution. By disobeying tyranny, now of course it depends on how you define tyranny, right? So I think the founding fathers were correct when they defined tyranny as, unelected monarchy, divine right of kings, unelected bureaucrats, all that kind of stuff. Like, pretty much anyone can agree, like, yeah, that's bad, we shouldn't have that. That's tyranny, and it should be resisted, even if it got violent at some points, which, don't get me wrong, it totally got violent at some points. And when you have a foundation myth, right, the story, the legacy, the lore of your country founded on revolution, well, it kind of sets the groundwork and inspiration for people to draw upon that later on in time, right? This is part of the reason that America has kind of been forced to have a powerful federal government. Not because, Americans are inherently unruly or anything, but because we have this legacy myth, right? The idea that we're going to resist tyranny, we're going to do what the hell we want to do the way we want to do it, just because we can. So, well, of course, you have a bunch of people feeling that way. That I'm not paying taxes, screw the government. Well, we had to revise the way the government operated quite a few times because people weren't paying any taxes. And it kind of goes back to the founding fathers didn't want to pay tax to the monarch. Well, why do I have to pay tax to the federal government? It just goes back to this very simple idea. And when smaller movements and organizations can draw upon that, it can actually really reflects poorly on that original myth. And I actually think the Confederacy did way more harm for America as a whole, as well as the founding fathers, because it kind of associates, this whole idea of let's go to war and fight for slavery. It kind of puts that at the forefront of, this whole idea of American ideology. Because when you look at the Confederate society, these people were not radicals. These people were products of their time. They were really drawing inspiration from the founding fathers. That's the least radical thing you can do. But when you look at what the founding fathers actually did, they were kind of radical. Overthrowing the government, kind of wild. Creating a new country on a new continent, kind of a wild thing to do, not gonna lie. And by drawing upon this, it was able to get a lot of people on board. Now, of course, there's always a lot of nuance and complexity to it. It's not as simple as, well, the Confederates just wanted to be, like the founding fathers. There's more to it than that. Really, it's actually kind of a conflict between the people who had a lot of money and slaves and people who didn't have a lot of money and slaves. Because the people who had a lot of money and slaves, the powerful, rich Southern families, well, they were able to kind of, I don't want to say trick, because it's not necessarily tricking, but they were able to manipulate the Southern population to get on board. Well, the North is telling us we can't have slaves. That's a violation of our freedom. And what do you know? A lot of people jumped on board because it does very much feel like a sovereign entity that is not under your control. It's like an external entity is telling you how to live your life. That is never a good feeling. I mean, look at what's going on with the EU. I mean, just in recent memory, we have Brexit happening where the UK voted to, get the heck out of the EU. That's because people don't like being told what to do by people who are like outside, who are external, not part of, the in-group, the country, the nation, whatever it is. You got to think about it in like the most simplistic way you can, right? Imagine you had a football team and the cheerleading team, right? Now imagine the cheerleaders, for some reason, they got to decide a whole bunch of the rules for the football players. Like, it just wouldn't make sense. It would be like, all the football players would be like, what the hell? Why are they making rules for us? Makes no sense. They're not part of us. There's no logic behind it. So it really is very much this idea that stay in your own path, stay in your own lane, stick to your own problems, and everything's going to be okay. And if not, well, we're going to throw a revolution and fight. And that's kind of the way it went down. And here's something I don't think a lot of people really understand about the Confederacy. I think it's very easy to pass judgment and kind of view these people as evil and immoral and lazy, and there's like a million horrible ways you can spin the Confederacy. But I don't think that they were really that bad of people. I think they were just kind of like ordinary people for the most part. Because historically, most people don't want big, crazy, radical change. Like most people, they just don't. And when big, crazy, radical change comes, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of stuff like, oh, hey, all the institutions that existed before this big, crazy, radical change are all gone. And now we have to figure out life from scratch. We have to rediscover the wheel. Right? This is just the way things go down. When the founding fathers went through the entirety of the revolution, it was just this crazy, chaotic event. It was chaos. There was a lot of uncertainty to it. Here we have a central government that was controlling you and your people, going back over 100 years. Especially a lot of the people that were colonists in America. Well, these were people that were subjects of the crown. These were people that originally came from the British Isles. They were royal subjects. And the idea of not being under the jurisdiction of the people that were, part of the empire, it's kind of a crazy, scary thing. That's why there was a lot of pushback. There were a lot of people in the colonies that were actually loyalists because, hey, you know what? Things are going not so good, but you know what? If we start killing British people, well, things might get worse. There's just a lot of uncertainty. It's like buying Bitcoin. It's like, the dollar has its issues. It's centrally controlled, crazy inflationary. But with Bitcoin, it could go to zero or $5 million. And it's who knows? You just don't know. Now, thankfully for the founding fathers, we can kind of there's hindsight has 20/20 vision. So we can look back and be like, oh, well, they took this, this great noble revolution and created the best country ever. Well, most of the time it doesn't go that way. And slavery really was something that was just a core element of the economy. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the Jefferson Davis Biocast, but I'm going to mention it again because I think it's really important to understand. Slavery was just how things got done. People did not have enough technology or labor-saving devices to be able to get all the farming done that people needed. If you wanted to make money in, colonial America, the only way you were going to be able to do that was if you had slaves, because there was just too much labor and work to be done that, there was just no way you could realistically do it as one person, or even if you were hiring people to do that work for you. It was just not feasible. It's only been now that we've kind of gotten rid of slavery that we've been able to really say, hey, you know what? It's people can make money from this and that venture because we have all this technology and labor-saving devices and, look at farming. It's come a long way. One farmer can feed 1,000 people, something like that. It's some crazy number. Whereas back in the day, not really the case. Not really the case. So when you have something that's just this is the way it is, well, you can definitely sit on your moral high horse and be slavery is evil. Well, you can do that if you don't rely on slavery as the way your civilization functions. That was the big distinction between the North and the South. The North, they came away from it fairly early on. There were a lot of abolitionists in the North from the very beginning. And when they got rid of slavery, it was this is a very difficult economic thing to turn away. And then they did, and and I'm sure it was very difficult. Let's not underplay that. It was a big sacrifice to go through. But part of that was worth it. It was totally worth it because in the long run, economically they were able to come away from it. They were able to get more industrialized faster. And really that's why the North won the war. Because they came away from slavery and they had more people investing in labor-saving devices and technology to be able to, get this stuff going, right? Whereas the South kind of had to rely on agricultural and, people working with their hands. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Especially when, there's this underclass of slaves that hate the upper class. That's just not... It's not feasible. Economically, it doesn't make sense. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. How these rich Southern families were able to kind of justify slavery. Because they didn't want to give up their cash cow. They were making a lot of money by owning slaves and having cotton plantations. And then also another core element of the Confederacy. The reason that they were able to convince so many poor people that didn't own slaves that slavery wasn't that bad really goes back to this idea that I might be a poor white person and I don't have anything to my name, nothing to be proud of, but at least I'm better than those slaves. I think it's kind of one of those things where there's definitely a layer of certain people have inferiority complexes, and it's easier to have people that are definitely going to be below you no matter what, because you personally don't have anything to be proud of. And you see this a lot with people that have to claim, the accomplishments of their race or their country, or, they're people that have similar political ideologies. People are obsessed with trying to define themselves in the better class of people. And you see this done in a bunch of different ways. Ideologically, there's a bunch of people that are oh, well, people that have my political leanings, well, we're smarter than all the other people with their political leanings. Well, you can make an argument, but it's it doesn't mean it's true. So really, the core elements of the Confederacy boil down to the fact that they were able to draw upon the Founding Fathers. And it was an economically efficient way to make money. And then the rich people, because it wasn't poor people who were benefiting from slavery. The rich people made money from slavery. People that had 100 slaves and a giant plantation where they were the richest people in the entire state. Those were the people that were pro-slavery. And then they were able to trick the lower classes, the poor whites, that, slavery is good because, well, hey, you might be a stupid failure, but hey, you're better than these slaves. And, enough of them were on board with that. Enough of them. And it's kind of sad, but there's definitely a large class of people where that's true. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoy this little discussion. Be sure to check out the Jefferson Davis Biocast. I think that's one of the most fascinating episodes I've done so far on Biocast. I think I have up to 9 episodes now. I've got Hitler, Stalin, Jefferson Davis, Edgar Allan Poe. Take your pick. I've got a new episode in the works right now on Cleopatra. That is going to be an insane episode. Very excited for that, and you should be too. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, follow the podcast, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.